The town of Fairview, Nebraska, had always been the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business. Streets were lined with modest homes, front porches adorned with flower pots, and kids played freely in yards, trusting that the world around them was safe. But in June of 2003, that sense of security shattered when young Clara Mitchell, only 8 years old, vanished without a trace. The entire community was gripped by fear and confusion, and for years, her disappearance became a ghost that haunted neighbors, teachers, and police alike. Her parents, Joanne and Michael Mitchell, were thrust into a nightmare they could never have imagined. They combed the neighborhood, passed out flyers, and spoke to anyone who might have seen her. But week after week, hope faded and despair deepened. Detectives from the local police department worked tirelessly, following leads, interviewing neighbors, and scouring surrounding areas, but each trail seemed to evaporate into thin air. The case became a fixture of police briefings and town gossip, with everyone speculating but no answers emerging. Over time, the initial shock morphed into a quiet, pervasive anxiety. Parents held their children closer, and the streets that once echoed with laughter felt unnervingly silent. Psychologists later noted that the prolonged uncertainty of Clara's disappearance likely caused widespread communal trauma, instilling a deep-seated fear that lingered long after the initial event. Despite the lack of progress, the Mitchells refused to give up. Joanne poured herself into organizing neighborhood searches and speaking at local schools about safety, hoping to protect other children from similar fates. Michael dedicated himself to reviewing case files, trying to spot something the initial investigation had missed. For years, the couple grappled with the duality of grief and hope that their daughter might still be found alive, and the unbearable grief of imagining the worst. Their story resonated throughout Fairview, becoming both a cautionary tale and a symbol of steadfast perseverance in the face of unimaginable loss. It wasn't until 2021, 18 years after Clara vanished, that a breakthrough emerged. Advances in forensic technology had changed the landscape of cold case investigations. DNA testing, combined with sophisticated genealogy techniques, allowed law enforcement to revisit unsolved cases with fresh eyes. A small, forgotten piece of evidence from the original investigation, a strand of hair found on Clara's backpack, was reanalyzed using these new methods. The results were astonishing. A match connected to a man with no prior record in Fairview, but a person who had been living on the outskirts of town for years, under the radar of neighbors who thought they knew everyone. The revelation sent shockwaves through the police department and reignited the hope of the Mitchell family. Detective Rachel Thompson, who spearheaded the renewed investigation, understood the psychological nuances at play. She knew that even after years, the memory of Clara's disappearance had never faded from the town's collective consciousness. Community members were simultaneously terrified and eager for answers. Thompson's approach combined meticulous evidence review with careful communication, ensuring that the police department maintained transparency without inflaming panic. Every decision was informed by an understanding of human behavior, how fear shapes memory, how long-term uncertainty can distort perception, and how closure could finally allow the town to heal. As detectives delved deeper, they uncovered a series of small but telling inconsistencies in the suspect's past behavior. Neighbors remembered subtle oddities, furtive glances, doors left unlocked at unusual times, and occasional unexplained absences that had been dismissed at the time. Re-examining these behaviors through a psychological lens, investigators began to see patterns that suggested premeditation and an ability to conceal malicious intent behind a veneer of normalcy. It became clear that the man had cultivated a carefully controlled image, blending seamlessly into the community while hiding dark impulses that ultimately led to Clara's disappearance. The search for tangible evidence intensified. Detectives meticulously revisited properties, searching for traces that could link the suspect to the crime. They examined storage units, sheds, and personal effects, eventually uncovering hidden items that confirmed their suspicions. A small box of photographs was discovered in the suspect's garage, some of which included Clara, taken at a time and place that corroborated her disappearance. The images were chilling in their clarity, revealing both the suspect's obsession and the vulnerability of the child. Forensic analysts documented everything meticulously, ensuring that every piece of evidence could withstand scrutiny in court. For the Mitchell family, the discovery was both devastating and relieving. The tangible proof of their daughter's fate ended nearly 2 decades of agonizing uncertainty. But the horrifying realization of the details brought a renewed wave of grief. Joanne Mitchell described the moment she learned of the photographs as a surreal mix of relief and terror, understanding that while justice was finally within reach, the images confirmed that Clara had endured suffering at the hands of someone she trusted enough to interact with normally. Psychologists observing the case noted that such dual emotions are common in long-term missing person cases when new evidence emerges after years of uncertainty. The human brain struggles to reconcile relief and trauma simultaneously, often resulting in an intense period of emotional recalibration. The arrest of the suspect was swift once the evidence was compiled. Officers approached his home early in the morning, taking care to avoid alerting him prematurely. The man was taken into custody without incident, but the weight of his actions hung heavily over the town. News of the arrest spread quickly, and Fairview residents struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the person revealed by the investigation. Community meetings were held to discuss safety measures, the impact of prolonged uncertainty, and the importance of vigilance in protecting children. The arrest was a turning point, but it also highlighted the fragility of trust and the hidden dangers that can exist even in close-knit communities. During interrogation, the suspect initially denied involvement, maintaining a calm demeanor that betrayed little emotion. However, as detectives methodically presented evidence, including the photographs, DNA results, and witness recollections, cracks began to appear in his composure. Behavioral experts accompanying the investigation noted subtle indicators of guilt, micro-expressions, inconsistent statements, and attempts to rationalize his actions. Over time, the suspect's facade began to crumble, and he ultimately confessed, providing chilling details about Clara's abduction and the meticulous planning he had employed to avoid detection. The confession not only corroborated the forensic findings, but also provided insight into the psychological dynamics of the crime. The trial became a focal point for the community, a culmination of nearly 2 decades of fear, hope, and unresolved questions. Prosecutors emphasized both the factual evidence and the broader emotional impact of the crime, illustrating how the suspect's actions had rippled through the town and the Mitchell family's lives. The defense attempted to mitigate his culpability, citing lack of prior criminal history and attempts at normalcy. But the combination of DNA evidence, photographs, and behavioral analysis left little room for doubt. Jurors were presented with a comprehensive narrative that intertwined forensic certainty with human experience, ensuring that every aspect of the case was considered. the jury deliberated for several days, grappling with the weight of their responsibility. For many, the details were harrowing, yet the clarity of evidence and consistency of witness testimonies provided a strong foundation for judgment. When the verdict was finally announced, guilty on all counts, the courtroom exhaled as the Mitchell family wept openly, finally able to acknowledge that justice, though delayed, had arrived. The suspect was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, a resolution that reflected the severity of his actions and the long-term suffering endured by the victim and her family. The resolution of Clara Mitchell's case had far-reaching effects beyond the courtroom. Fairview, though still processing the horror of the crime, began to rebuild its sense of security. Parents took renewed care in monitoring their children. Schools implemented additional safety protocols, and law enforcement emphasized the importance of reporting even minor suspicious behavior. The Mitchell family, though forever changed, found solace in knowing that their perseverance had ultimately led to justice. Community initiatives were established in Clara's memory, including scholarship funds and child safety awareness programs, ensuring that her legacy contributed to the protection of future generations. The Nebraska cold case also became a case study in the power of modern forensic science and behavioral analysis. Law enforcement agencies across the state and beyond examined the investigation as an example of integrating DNA technology, genealogical research, and psychological profiling to solve long-standing mysteries. Experts highlighted the importance of persistence, attention to detail, and an understanding of human behavior in successfully addressing cold cases. The Fairview story reinforced the notion that even in small towns, where familiarity can create a false sense of security, hidden dangers can exist in that diligent, informed investigation can uncover the truth. For the Mitchells, the journey toward healing continued. While the pain of losing Clara never fully dissipated, the certainty of justice allowed them to process their grief more fully. Joanne and Michael became advocates for missing children, speaking publicly about the importance of community vigilance, forensic innovation, and unwavering hope. Psychologists studying the family's response noted that active engagement in advocacy and education can be a powerful tool in trauma recovery, helping individuals transform personal loss into meaningful action that benefits society. Fairview's streets slowly regained the sounds of children at play, though the memory of Clara's disappearance lingered as a cautionary tale. The case had changed the town forever, but it had also demonstrated resilience, the capacity for collective action, and the triumph of meticulous investigation over the obscuring effects of time. Law enforcement, the Mitchell family, and the community together had navigated fear, grief, and uncertainty to bring clarity and justice, illustrating that even in the darkest moments, human insight, persistence, and empathy can illuminate the path forward. The arrest of the suspect did not instantly erase the fear that had gripped Fairview for nearly 2 decades. Even as Clara Mitchell's parents, Joanne and Michael, felt a bittersweet relief, neighbors found themselves revisiting old memories with uneasy clarity. The subtle signs they had once dismissed, doors ajar, missing items, fleeting glances, now seemed like ominous warnings they should have heeded. Psychologists studying the impact of cold cases on small communities note that unresolved crimes create what is called ambient anxiety, a persistent unease that can permeate daily life. In Fairview, this anxiety had never entirely disappeared, and the revelation that a neighbor had been the culprit reignited it. leaving parents cautious and children more closely monitored. Detective Rachel Thompson remained deeply involved. Understanding that the arrest was only one part of the larger journey toward healing, she knew that uncovering the truth after so many years would trigger a cascade of emotional reactions: relief, anger, grief, and disbelief. Thompson worked closely with the Mitchells, offering counseling, referrals, and facilitating support groups for other families affected by the case. She emphasized that the psychological toll of long-term uncertainty often rivals that of immediate trauma. The town had been living with an invisible threat for 18 years, and confronting the reality of what happened to Clara required careful, deliberate attention to emotional as well as legal details. The trial brought these emotions to the surface in a way the community had not experienced since Clara's disappearance. Court sessions were tense, with the gallery often filled to capacity. Members of the town, including teachers, friends, and neighbors, watched as prosecutors presented meticulously gathered evidence, combining physical artifacts with behavioral analysis. The photographs recovered from the suspect's possessions were shown carefully, with investigators emphasizing their evidentiary importance rather than sensationalizing their content. This approach allowed the jury to focus on the facts while also understanding the broader human context, the manipulation and deception the suspect had used to conceal his actions for years. Behavioral experts played a crucial role in the courtroom, explaining how the suspect's outward normalcy masked his true intentions. They detailed patterns of control and grooming that had likely enabled him to approach and manipulate Clara without immediate suspicion. Experts described how long-term planning and subtle manipulations often leave minimal traces, making detection difficult, especially when children are involved. The jury was presented with clear explanations of why a child like Clara, trusting and innocent, could have been targeted by someone who carefully masked his deviant behavior. This psychological framing helped the jury understand not only what happened, but how it happened, creating a narrative that was both compelling and grounded in human behavior. Outside the courtroom, the town grappled with mixed feelings. Some residents expressed relief that justice had been served, while others admitted to lingering suspicion and paranoia. In small towns like Fairview, the revelation that someone who had been part of the community for years could commit such a crime was deeply unsettling. Social psychologists note that such breaches of trust can have lasting effects, reducing social cohesion and altering perceptions of safety. Families began having more intentional conversations about vigilance, stranger danger, and the importance of trusting instincts, creating a new cultural awareness around child safety for the Mitchell family. The courtroom proceedings were emotionally exhausting but also clarifying. Joanne and Michael found themselves reliving painful memories while simultaneously gaining a sense of empowerment. The detailed presentation of the suspect's behavior helped them understand that Clara's disappearance, though tragic, had not been random. Each piece of evidence reinforced the reality that justice was achievable, even after nearly 2 decades. This understanding became a turning point in their grieving process, allowing them to move forward with advocacy work, counseling, and community engagement. The defense, recognizing the overwhelming evidence, attempted to introduce mitigating factors, focusing on the suspect's history of normalcy and lack of prior criminal record. However, the combination of DNA evidence, photographs, and behavioral analysis left little room for reasonable doubt. The jury listened carefully as experts outlined the psychological profile of the perpetrator, highlighting traits such as manipulativeness, premeditation, and the ability to maintain a dual life. This detailed understanding of human behavior, grounded in decades of criminology research, helped ensure that the verdict would reflect both the severity of the crime and the sophisticated planning that had enabled it. As the trial progressed, the town of Fairview began to process the implications of the case in broader terms. Parents revisited safety practices, schools implemented new protocols, and law enforcement emphasized the importance of maintaining awareness even in close-knit communities. Psychologists noted that collective trauma requires collective healing, and the town began holding forums to discuss not only the crime but also strategies for rebuilding trust and security. Clara's disappearance, once a source of lingering fear, became a catalyst for community-wide education and vigilance. One particularly striking aspect of the investigation was the role of forgotten evidence. A small detail overlooked in the initial investigation had ultimately led to the suspect's identification. The hair strand from Clara's backpack, preserved and reanalyzed years later, demonstrated the critical importance of meticulous evidence management. Forensic specialists emphasized that seemingly minor items can become pivotal as technology advances, reinforcing the need for thorough documentation and preservation in all criminal investigations. This revelation sparked discussions within law enforcement circles about the potential for cold cases to be solved even decades later, encouraging agencies nationwide to revisit unresolved files. Psychological insights played a critical role beyond the courtroom as well. Experts guided the Mitchells and the community in understanding the stages of trauma recovery, emphasizing the importance of acknowledging grief while fostering resilience. Joanne and Michael became advocates for these strategies, speaking publicly about coping mechanisms, community support, and the psychological impact of long-term uncertainty. Their experiences illustrated how individual and collective trauma intersect, highlighting the ways in which families, law enforcement, and communities can work together to mitigate long-term psychological harm. The suspect's confession added another layer of complexity to the narrative, while it provided crucial details confirming the forensic evidence. It also revealed patterns of deception and planning that had allowed him to remain undetected for nearly 2 decades. Behavioral experts analyzed the confession, noting subtle indications of narcissism and manipulativeness that had contributed to his ability to evade suspicion. These insights underscored the importance of understanding criminal psychology, particularly in cases involving children, and reinforced the value of combining forensic evidence with behavioral analysis in solving complex crimes. During the months following the arrest, the Mitchells engaged in extensive community outreach. They shared their story with schools, parent groups, and local organizations, emphasizing vigilance, the importance of reporting unusual behavior, and the value of persistence in seeking justice. Psychologists observed that transforming personal trauma into proactive advocacy can be therapeutic, helping survivors regain a sense of control and purpose. In Fairview, the Mitchells' work helped foster a culture of awareness, teaching children and adults alike to trust their instincts and prioritize safety without succumbing to fear. The case also had broader implications for law enforcement training and cold case management. Agencies across Nebraska and neighboring states examined the investigation as a model for integrating DNA technology, genealogy, and psychological profiling into long-term investigations. The success demonstrated that persistence, combined with evolving technological and behavioral insights, can overcome the challenges posed by time and obscured evidence. Cold cases, once thought unsolvable, gained new hope as departments recognized the power of combining meticulous investigation with deep understanding of human behavior. For the town, the long shadow of Clara Mitchell's disappearance gradually began to lift. Streets once approached with caution regained the sound of children laughing, though memories of the past lingered in the minds of parents and teachers. Community workshops, safety campaigns, and memorial events honored Clara's life while reinforcing the lessons learned from her tragic abduction. Psychologists emphasized that public acknowledgement and community involvement are crucial in mitigating the long-term effects of trauma, allowing both individuals and communities to reclaim a sense of safety and normalcy. Joanne and Michael Mitchell, though forever marked by grief, experienced a profound transformation in the wake of justice. Their advocacy and outreach became a cornerstone of Fairview's renewed commitment to child safety. They worked closely with law enforcement, school administrators, and mental health professionals to create programs that educated families, improved reporting systems, and provided emotional support to children and parents alike. Their journey illustrated how resilience, determination, and proactive engagement can transform personal tragedy into a powerful force for communal good. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the evidence presented painted a vivid portrait of both the crime and the psychological dynamics that allowed it to occur. Jurors were asked to consider not only the facts, but also the behavioral patterns, the calculated manipulation, and the long-term impact on the Mitchell family and the wider community. The combined presentation of forensic evidence, photographs, witness testimony, and expert analysis provided a comprehensive understanding of the crime, leaving little room for doubt. It was a testament to the meticulous work of law enforcement and the importance of integrating psychological expertise into criminal investigations. The town of Fairview, while still carrying the memory of Clara Mitchell, began to see the possibility of closure. Community members found solace in the knowledge that the person responsible had been identified, arrested, and would face the full consequences of his actions. Public discussions shifted from fear and speculation to reflection, education, and the development of long-term safety measures. The case demonstrated that, even in small towns, where familiarity can create a false sense of security, diligent investigation, informed analysis, and community engagement can reveal hidden truths and prevent further harm. The trial reached its final weeks, and the tension in Fairview was palpable. Families who had once whispered about Clara Mitchell's disappearance now filled the courthouse every day, watching each detail of the case unfold. The Mitchells sat together, holding hands tightly, their faces showing a mix of grief, exhaustion, and cautious hope. For them, the trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was the moment when years of unanswered questions would finally be addressed, when the community could see the truth fully revealed. Prosecutors methodically recounted the events, presenting the chain of evidence that had finally led to the arrest. From the preserved hair strand to the photographs and meticulous behavioral analysis, every element was carefully outlined, showing how the suspect's web of deception had unraveled over nearly 2 decades. The courtroom was filled with an unusual quiet, broken only by the occasional gasp as previously unknown details came to light. Witnesses who had been interviewed years ago returned to testify, their memories now sharpened by the clarity provided by new evidence. Teachers, neighbors, and even former classmates of the suspect provided accounts of subtle, sometimes disturbing, behavior that, in hindsight, pointed to a darker pattern. Each testimony layered the story with human nuance, showing how trust had been manipulated and how the suspect had navigated social interactions to avoid detection. Behavioral experts continued to explain how individuals with manipulative tendencies often blend seamlessly into ordinary communities, maintaining appearances while committing heinous acts in secret. One particularly gripping moment came when the confession was read aloud. The suspect detailed his actions in a way that was clinical, almost detached, revealing the calculated nature of his crimes. Yet underneath the words, subtle indications of guilt and fear emerged micro-expressions, slight pauses, and inconsistencies that were picked up by attentive observers and psychologists in the courtroom. Experts later explained that these small behavioral cues are critical in understanding the internal state of offenders, particularly those capable of long-term deceit. For the Mitchell family, hearing the confession was simultaneously horrifying and relieving. They finally knew the truth, even if it could not undo the years of suffering. Outside the courtroom, the town wrestled with a mixture of emotions. Long-time residents, who had felt betrayed by someone they once considered a neighbor, struggled to reconcile the person they knew with the criminal described in court. Social scientists note that communities facing such revelations often undergo a period of collective cognitive dissonance, as they try to align past perceptions with present realities. In Fairview, this dissonance manifested in renewed conversations about vigilance, parental responsibility, and the importance of recognizing subtle warning signs in children's interactions and social environments. Schools organized meetings with parents, local churches held discussion sessions, and community leaders emphasized collective responsibility for child safety. Meanwhile, the Mitchells began their own journey of public advocacy. Joanne and Michael spoke openly about their experiences, sharing both the pain of loss and the hope of justice. They emphasized the importance of persistence, the need for thorough investigation, and the power of technology in solving cold cases. Their story resonated deeply with other families, inspiring support networks and community safety initiatives. Psychologists working with the Mitchells highlighted how transforming trauma into action can foster resilience and give survivors a renewed sense of purpose, helping them regain control after years of helplessness. The jury, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, returned with a verdict that brought a mixture of relief and solemnity. The suspect was found guilty on multiple counts, the evidence overwhelming and the psychological profile fully supporting the case against him. In the courtroom, some family members wept openly, their grief intertwined with relief that justice had finally been served. Others remained silent, contemplating the weight of the years lost and the emotional scars left behind. Outside news spread quickly throughout the town and neighboring communities, many of whom had followed the case since Clara's disappearance. The sense of closure, though hard-earned, was tangible, as people recognized the importance of perseverance, meticulous investigation, and the careful integration of behavioral insights. In the weeks following the verdict, Fairview began to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Community initiatives focused on child safety became more prominent, with workshops, counseling programs, and awareness campaigns being established in schools and public spaces. Residents reflected on the lessons learned, the critical value of noticing small behavioral red flags, the importance of maintaining records and reporting suspicious activity, and the need for communal vigilance. The Mitchell family remained at the heart of these initiatives, helping families understand that proactive measures and education can significantly reduce the risk of harm. Their advocacy highlighted the intersection between personal trauma and societal benefit, showing how tragedy can be transformed into a force for long-term communal well-being. Law enforcement officers involved in the case also drew critical insights from the investigation. The combination of preserved evidence, modern DNA analysis, genealogy research, and behavioral profiling was recognized as a model for future cold cases. Training programs began incorporating lessons from Fairview, emphasizing persistence, meticulous documentation, and the integration of psychological understanding in suspect assessment. Officers noted that the meticulous preservation of even minor evidence, like the strand of hair or the photographs, can be pivotal years later, reinforcing the necessity of careful investigative procedures in every case. The psychological impact on the Mitchell family evolved over time. While grief never fully disappeared, the clarity and justice achieved allowed them to begin reclaiming their lives. Joanne and Michael engaged in counseling, support groups, and advocacy, finding purpose in sharing their experience and helping others. Psychologists emphasized that closure is not the end of emotional processing, but a step toward integrating traumatic events into life narratives, allowing individuals to live meaningfully while carrying their memories with them. The Mitchells' proactive engagement became a model for other families grappling with unresolved trauma, demonstrating the power of resilience and deliberate action. Meanwhile, the town's collective psyche shifted from fear to cautious optimism. Parents felt more empowered, children were educated in safe practices, and schools implemented better monitoring protocols. The tragedy that had once defined Fairview became a catalyst for meaningful change. Experts in human behavior highlighted how communities often recover stronger after confronting difficult truths, especially when guided by both professional insight and personal experience. The lessons learned extended beyond Fairview, inspiring neighboring towns to revisit unresolved cases and prioritize child safety measures. Reflecting on the case, Detective Rachel Thompson acknowledged the unique combination of factors that led to its resolution. Persistence, meticulous evidence management, psychological profiling, and evolving technology all played critical roles. She noted that cold cases are rarely linear. They require patience, adaptability, and an understanding of human behavior. Thompson emphasized that the successful resolution of Clara Mitchell's case provided hope for countless other unresolved cases, proving that even decades old, mysteries could be solved when expertise and determination converge. The story of Clara Mitchell became more than a cold case. It became a narrative about resilience, justice, and the power of human understanding. Fairview, once paralyzed by fear, began to heal. Memorial events honoring Clara's life included educational components, teaching safety, awareness, and the importance of listening to one's instincts. The Mitchell family continued their advocacy, helping transform collective trauma into positive action. Their journey illustrated that even the most tragic events can inspire meaningful change when approached with courage, knowledge, and a deep understanding of human psychology. As months passed, the psychological ripple effects of the case remained evident. Families reported feeling more vigilant but also more connected, understanding that community engagement is a key component of safety. Workshops led by the Mitchells and local counselors became integral to the town's culture, fostering a sense of empowerment among parents and children alike. Children were encouraged to voice concerns, recognize unsafe situations, and trust their instincts, while adults learned the importance of noticing subtle behavioral cues and maintaining open communication. The case also reinforced the significance of forensic science advancements. The preserved evidence from 2003, when combined with modern DNA and genealogy methods, became the linchpin that brought the suspect to justice. Law enforcement agencies nationally took note, reviewing their own cold cases to identify opportunities for resolution. The Fairview investigation became a case study in how persistence, patience, and scientific innovation could converge to solve even the most perplexing and emotionally charged crimes. For the Mitchell family, the long journey ended with a mix of closure and continued vigilance. Clara's absence would always be felt, but the justice achieved allowed them to honor her memory through action, education, and advocacy. Their story, shared widely through media and community events, inspired other families and law enforcement officers to believe in the possibility of resolution. No matter how much time has passed, the combination of emotional resilience, psychological insight, and forensic science demonstrated that justice, though delayed, is never beyond reach. In the end, Fairview emerged stronger, a community that had confronted fear, deception, and grief with courage and unity. The case of Clara Mitchell, once a source of darkness and uncertainty, became a testament to the power of human perseverance, understanding, and collaboration. Families felt empowered, law enforcement felt validated, and the broader community learned that vigilance, combined with empathy and knowledge, can protect the most vulnerable and restore faith in justice. The lessons of 2003, revisited in 2021, echoed far beyond Fairview, reminding all that even the longest shadows can be illuminated, and that truth, when pursued relentlessly, can bring closure, healing, and hope.